My mother's hands went still the moment I walked through the door of that hearing room. She had been clutching her coat in her lap, the way she always did when she was nervous, fingers working the fabric in small, tight circles. When she looked up and saw me, those hands just stopped. My father was sitting beside her. He turned a half-second later. His face didn't change all at once. It was slower than that, like watching ice crack, something spreading from his eyes outward, quiet and irreversible. I was in full uniform. Service dress, gold captain's insignia on my shoulders, the Canadian flag on my sleeve. I had worn this uniform to briefings and ceremonies and deployment farewells, but I had never worn it in front of the two people who believed I had walked away from it before it ever meant anything. I hadn't seen them in 9 years. And before a single word passed between us, the uniform had already started telling the truth my sister had spent nearly a decade burying. But to understand how we ended up in that room, I have to go back to a town most people in Ontario have never heard of, a place called Cobden, about an hour and a half west of Ottawa in Renfrew County. It's the kind of place where the hardware store knows your truck and the United Church knows your grandmother. My father, Gary, drove a school bus for 22 years and spent his weekends fixing things in the garage. My mother, Carol, worked mornings at the county office and came home to start dinner before my father's bus pulled back into the lot. The house smelled like pine cleaner and whatever was on the stove, and every Remembrance Day, my parents drove to the cenotaph in Renfrew and stood in the cold without being asked. My sister Dana was 3 years older than me and everything a small town celebrates. She was easy with people in the way some people just are, quick to laugh, quick to make you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. Teachers liked her. Neighbors asked after her by name. My parents lit up when she walked in. I understood why. Dana had a kind of brightness that I didn't. I wasn't dark exactly. I was just quieter, more comfortable with structure than with rooms full of people. While Dana was organizing the school dance, I was running the back roads before sunrise. By the time I was 17, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to join the Canadian Armed Forces. Not because I had a romantic idea about it, I had read enough to know the reality, but because something about the discipline, the clarity of purpose, the idea of earning something through sustained effort fit the way my mind already worked. I told my parents one night after dinner. My mother set down her tea. My father looked up from the paper. "The forces," my mother said slowly. "Yes." My father studied me the way he studied a repair he hadn't figured out yet. "What branch?" he asked. "Army," I said. "Infantry officer stream? Maybe logistics eventually." My sister was home that weekend. She laughed once from the couch. Not meanly, just the way someone laughs when something surprises them. "You're sure about that?" she said. "Basic training isn't exactly a school trip." "I know what it is," I said. My father was quiet for a while. Then he said, "If you're going to start it, you finish it. Don't leave things half done." That sentence traveled with me for years. I left for the Canadian Forces Leadership and Recruit School in St. Jean-sur-Richelieu in the early spring, a few months before my 18th birthday. Basic training was 13 weeks of cold mornings, physical exhaustion, and the particular satisfaction of meeting a standard that doesn't bend for feelings. I wrote home twice a week. My mother wrote back with news about the church potluck and the neighbor's new dog. My father's letters were shorter. One of them just said, "Your mother made pie. Hope you're eating." That was enough. My sister sent one postcard, a picture of a loon on a lake. On the back she wrote, "Still alive?" Very funny, I kept it. The letters stopped coming around week 8. At first I told myself the mail was slow, that things get held up, that my mother was busy. I waited another week and called home during our scheduled phone block. No answer. I left a message. "Hey, it's me, just checking in. Hope everything's okay." No one called back. The next phone block, I tried again. My mother answered. Her voice was careful in a way I hadn't heard before, like she was choosing each word before she let it out. "Mom," I said. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause. "We heard you had some trouble," she said. The words didn't land right away. "Trouble how?" She said my name quietly. "Dana called us last week." My stomach dropped. "She said you were let go," my mother said, "that you didn't make it through training." "I'm standing in a payphone booth at a military base in Quebec," I said. "I'm 7 weeks into basic. I didn't go anywhere." Silence. "Mom," I said slowly, "I am still here. I'm still in." She made a small sound, something between a breath and a word. Dana said, "I know what Dana said. It isn't true." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then my mother said something I would replay for years. She said Dana wouldn't make something like that up. I held the phone against my ear and listened to the hum of the line. I tried twice more to explain. My mother said she had to go start dinner. The call ended. I stood in that phone booth looking at the cinder block wall for longer than I should have. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I told myself that once I came home in uniform, once they could see it with their own eyes, it would resolve itself the way simple misunderstandings do. I finished basic training. I came home on leave. The house looked exactly the same: white siding, the old birch tree in the front yard, the same Canada flag bracket above the door my father had installed the year I was born. I pulled in the driveway and sat for a minute before getting out. My mother answered the door halfway. She looked past me and then at me and then past me again, like she was checking whether I had brought someone with me. I told her I was on leave, that I had finished basic, that I was heading to Phase 2 training in September. She didn't open the door all the way. My father appeared behind her. His expression was the one he used when he didn't want to have a conversation but had decided to have it anyway. He said, "Dana told us the whole story." I said, "Then Dana told you something that isn't true." He shook his head once, slowly, the way someone shakes their head when they've already decided. "I'm not going to stand here and argue with you," he said. "When you're ready to talk honestly, you know where we are." And then my mother quietly, without anger, like she was just closing a cupboard, said, "Give us some time." The door clicked shut. I stood on that step for a while. The birch tree moved a little in the wind. A neighbor's dog barked down the street. I walked back to my car and drove to my friend's place in Renfrew and slept on her couch. And in the morning I drove back to the highway heading south and didn't stop until I crossed into Quebec. I told myself they would come around. People do. But I was wrong about that part. After that leave, something inside me shifted. Not loudly. More like a slow recalibration. The way a compass adjusts when you change direction. I couldn't make my parents believe me. I couldn't make my sister tell the truth. What I could do was finish what I started. I wrote them a letter when I arrived at my Phase 2 training. I explained everything again, clearly, with dates and unit names and a phone number for my chain of command. No one from Cobden ever called that number. The letter was never answered. I wrote one more after I received my commission as a second lieutenant. That one came back stamped "Return to Sender." I stood at the mailbox looking at that envelope for a long time. Then I put it in a box in my room and kept going. My first posting was to CFB Petawawa, less than an hour from Cobden. I could have driven home in 40 minutes, but a door that closes for the wrong reasons doesn't open just because you're close to it. I focused on my work. Logistics officer, support company, supply chains, equipment accountability, deployment coordination. It's the kind of work that keeps everything else moving, and most people never think about it until something goes wrong. I made sure things didn't go wrong. I was good at my job, not because I was exceptional from the beginning, but because I paid attention and I didn't cut corners, and I came back the next day when I got something wrong. By my third year, I had a reputation for calm. My sergeant major once said, "Sir, you've got the most boring emergency face I've ever seen." I took that as high praise. Still, December was hard. My family's Christmases had been quiet and specific in the way small-town Christmases are my mother's shortbread. My father's annual attempt to get the outdoor lights to stop blinking asymmetrically, Dana and me arguing over which movie to watch after church. The first Christmas after the door closed, I sent a card. Simple. "Thinking of you. Love you." No response. I sent one the next year, and the year after that. On the fourth year, the card came back unopened. I sat with that for a while. Then I sent another one anyway. I don't entirely know why. Something stubborn that refused to let the door close completely, even after they had turned the lock. 5 years into my service, I met James. James Tremblay was a logistics warrant officer from Gatineau who had been in the Army for almost 12 years when we crossed paths during a joint exercise at CFB Valcartier. He was the kind of person who made careful decisions and then stuck to them, which I found immediately reassuring. We had our first real conversation over coffee in the mess at the end of a long planning day. I was staring at a map that had stopped making sense 20 minutes earlier. He sat down across from me, looked at the map, looked at me, and said, "That expression means you haven't eaten since noon." He was right. We went to the Tim Hortons on base. That was how it started. James never pushed me about my family. He asked once, early on, and I told him the short version, and he listened carefully, and then said, "That must have been lonely," and then he let it be. He understood the particular rhythm of military life, the deployments, the long stretches of silence, the way the work becomes its own kind of anchor when other things come loose. 3 years later, we got married at a small venue outside Ottawa. A few friends, a couple of colleagues, James's family from Gatineau. I mailed an invitation to Cobden. The envelope came back 2 weeks later, unopened. James held my hand during the ceremony. He said something quiet near the end that I haven't forgotten. He said, "You're not alone in this anymore." And standing there in that small room with the autumn light coming through the windows, I believed him. 2 years after that, our daughter Sophie was born. If you've ever held your child for the first time, you know there's a particular kind of rearranging that happens in your chest. Sophie had James's patience and, according to him, my stubbornness. She also had grandparents in Renfrew County who had never seen her face. I sent a letter to Cobden with a photograph. Sophie in a yellow sleeper, 3 days old. I wrote 2 sentences. "You have a granddaughter. Her name is Sophie." I waited 6 weeks. Nothing arrived. Life kept moving. Sophie grew. James and I managed deployments the way military I completed a tour attached to a NATO mission in Latvia, 6 months away. 6 months of satellite calls with Sophie holding up drawings to the screen. James sent weekly photos. In one of them, Sophie is wearing my old garrison cap and saluting a houseplant. I kept that photo in my breast pocket for the rest of the deployment. When I came back, I had a promotion to captain waiting. The ceremony was at Petawawa on a gray October morning. James stood beside me. Sophie, who was 4, sat in the front row and spent most of the ceremony arranging small toys on the bench beside her. When they pinned the insignia to my collar, I heard James exhale slowly next to me, the way someone exhales when something has finally settled into place. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I thought about my parents in Cobden, the cenotaph they still drove to every November, the flag bracket above their door. I thought about how my father had said, "If you start it, finish it." I had finished it. I had done more than finish it. And they had no way of knowing. They had chosen not to know. I went to bed and, in the morning, went back to work. 3 years later, a file landed on my desk that changed everything. I was reviewing unit administrative paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon when the case summary came through. Standard formatting, straightforward language. I read the header and kept moving, and then I went back. The name on the file was Dana Brennan, my sister's married name. I hadn't known she'd married. I hadn't known she'd enlisted. I hadn't known anything about her life in 9 years. I opened the file. My sister had enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces as a private about 4 years after I left Cobden. She had done basic training and proceeded to a supply technician role. Her early evaluations were solid. But somewhere in the last 2 years, things had gone sideways. The file described a pattern of irregular inventory reporting at her unit supply depot equipment, signed out without corresponding authorization, records backdated, accountability logs that didn't match physical inspection results. Nothing catastrophic on its own. But audited together, the pattern was clear. This was a service misconduct matter that had escalated to a formal summary hearing. I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a while. The same military she told my parents I couldn't survive had been watching her do the thing she told them I had done. The same system she used as a lie was now the system that would determine what happened next. My commanding officer, Major Desjardins, called me in that afternoon. She was a methodical woman in her 40s who had the particular talent of saying difficult things without making them feel like attacks. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "The Brennan case," she said. "You've seen the file." "Yes, ma'am." She studied my face for a moment. "You're related to the subject?" "Yes. She's my older sister." Major Desjardins was quiet. Then she said, "The review panel needs someone with supply chain and logistics oversight experience." Your name came up. I understood what she was asking. "I want to be clear," she said. "We can assign someone else. There is no pressure here. This is a judgment call, and it's yours." I thought about that. Part of me wanted to step back and have nothing to do with it. But a larger part of me, the part that 9 years of service had built, understood something that wasn't comfortable but was true. The work is the work. Whether the file has a stranger's name or your sister's name on it, that's not hardness. That's accountability. I can do it, I said. Major Desjardins nodded once. The hearing is Friday. She paused. Your parents will likely be there. I said nothing to that for a moment. Then I said, yes, ma'am. I expect they will. The week before the hearing moved, the way difficult weeks move slowly during the day and too quickly at night. Sophie was in grade 2, and going through a phase of asking very precise questions about things I had no good answer for. Why does fog happen? Why do people lie? Why is the sky not the same color everywhere? I answered the ones I could. For the others I said, I don't know, let's find out together. Which is, I think, the most honest thing you can say to a child. James knew something was weighing on me. The second evening, after Sophie was in bed, he brought 2 mugs of tea to the couch and sat beside me. The hearing? He said. Yes. Your sister? Yes. He didn't say anything right away. Then he said, do you think she regrets it? The lie? I looked at the mug in my hands. I think she probably stopped thinking about it after a while, I said. That's what happens. You tell a lie, and the lie becomes the story, and eventually you stop remembering it's not the truth. James nodded slowly, then he said something careful. Sometimes people hold on to things longer than they meant to, and they don't know how to let go. I didn't respond. I thought about the Christmas cards coming back unopened, about the invitation that was never answered, about a photograph of a newborn that disappeared into silence. Maybe, I said. The morning of the hearing I was up before 5. Old habit. I stood in our bedroom and dressed carefully. The service dress is precise work, everything in a specific order, a specific place. James stood in the doorway and watched. Sophie appeared behind him, still half asleep, hair in all directions. Mom, she said. Morning, I said. She looked at the uniform with the quiet appraisal of an 8-year-old who has grown up around military dress. You look serious, she said. It's a serious day. She came over and hugged me around the waist. I held her for a moment longer than usual. James kissed my temple when I passed him in the doorway. You ready? He said. As I'll ever be. The hearing room at the base wasn't large. Institutional chairs, wooden paneling, the Canadian flag in the corner. The kind of room that doesn't try to be impressive because it doesn't need to be. I arrived early and took my place at the review table. The room began to fill quietly, a few officers, administrative staff, legal counsel for both sides. I didn't look toward the gallery right away. I sorted my documents. I checked the case summary one more time. Then, when the duty officer asked everyone to be seated, I turned. My parents were in the 3rd row. 9 years is long enough for a person to change in ways that take you by surprise. My father's hair had gone fully gray. He was still broad-shouldered, still holding himself the way he always had, straight-backed, economical. But he moved more carefully than I remembered. My mother sat beside him in a dark blue coat. She looked smaller. Not frail, just less amplified than the mother I had kept in my head for almost a decade. They hadn't seen me yet. Their attention was on the front of the room, on my sister seated at the table to my left. Dana had changed too. She was 41 now. Private, supply technician. She sat with her hands flat on the table in front of her, not fidgeting, not looking around. There was something worn into her expression that I hadn't expected. Not guilt exactly. More like exhaustion. Then the duty officer announced the commencement of proceedings, and the room shifted, and my mother looked up. The moment she saw me, her face went through several things very quickly. Recognition, confusion, disbelief, and something she couldn't quite locate that looked like it might be grief. She put her hand over her mouth. My father turned a second later. He leaned forward, squinting. Then he went absolutely still. The uniform did the talking. Captain's rank, years of service ribbons, the NATO medal from Latvia. The posture of someone who has been doing this a long time. People who walk away from their training in week 8 don't appear 9 years later, as officers in a formal hearing. The proceedings began. Legal counsel reviewed the charges. Falsified accountability logs. Backdated equipment records. Authorization signatures applied before inspections had occurred. The language was precise and calm. The military doesn't make accusations dramatic. It presents documentation, and documentation has a way of speaking for itself. 2 witnesses spoke during the first session. A supply sergeant who had flagged the initial discrepancies. An audit officer who had traced the timeline. Neither of them dramatized anything. They simply described what the records showed, And what the record showed was not complex. My sister had signed off on things she hadn't checked. She had done it more than once, across more than one reporting cycle. While testimony was being given, I was aware of my parents watching me from the gallery. Not constantly, but regularly. The way you watch something you're trying to understand. I felt their eyes on my shoulders, on the insignia, on my hands organizing papers at the table. I heard the question they weren't asking out loud. If she left, why is she here? During the first recess, I stayed in the room briefly to review a timeline document. When I stepped out into the hallway, my parents were standing near the far wall. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then my mother said my name. Just my name. Like she was testing whether it still fit. I said, "Hi, Mom." She looked at the uniform from a short distance, the same way she used to look at school projects I brought home carefully, trying to take in all of it at once. "You're still in," she said quietly. "I've been in for 9 years." My father's eyes were on the rank insignia on my shoulders. "Captain," he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been a captain?" "About 2 years." He absorbed that. He looked down at the floor briefly, the way my father looked when he was working through something he didn't have a ready answer for. Across the hallway, I noticed my sister had stepped out of the hearing room. She stood a short distance away with her hands in her pockets, watching the three of us. When I looked at her, she didn't look away. She just looked tired. My mother's voice came out unsteady. She said, "I don't understand." "I know," I said. "Dana told us she started, and then stopped." "I know what Dana told you." My father cleared his throat quietly. He looked at me directly for the first time. His voice was lower than I remembered. "You're saying you never left." "I never left." He was quiet. A long, particular quiet. The duty officer called us back inside. We moved without resolving anything, which is often how the most important conversations go. The second session of the hearing moved quickly. The case was not complicated. My sister had not committed fraud for personal gain. She had not caused a significant material loss to the unit. What she had done was create a pattern of sloppy accountability that undermined the trust the supply system is built on, and in operational logistics, trust in the records is not a small thing. The reviewing officer noted that my sister had not disputed the documentation. Her legal counsel confirmed she was prepared to accept the findings. The consequence was a formal reprimand, reduction in rank to recruit, and release from service. Not imprisonment, not a dishonorable outcome, but the end of a career and the loss of service benefits she had accumulated. The reviewing officer read the finding quietly. My sister accepted it with a single nod. The room cleared slowly after the proceedings concluded. I packed my documents and stepped into the hallway. Both of my parents were waiting. So was Dana. It was the four of us, for the first time in 9 years, standing in a government hallway under fluorescent lighting. I don't know what I had imagined this moment would look like over the years. Whatever I had imagined, it wasn't this, the four of us slightly awkward, slightly too aware of each other. The air between us full of things that hadn't been said yet. My father spoke first, looking at Dana. He said her name in a flat, careful voice. Dana looked at the floor. Then at our parents. Then at me. She said, "I didn't think you'd still be in. Was that supposed to make it better?" I said, not angrily, just honestly. She shook her head slowly. "No, I didn't think about it that much, after a while. That's the truth." I said it, and then I didn't know how to take it back. My mother's voice was shaking. "You let us believe she'd failed." Dana didn't try to argue. She said, "Yeah, I did." "Why?" My father said. Just that one word, heavy and simple. My sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. She said, "Do you remember when I was in grade 12 and you drove down to the hockey game in Pembroke? Dad's team was playing, and you told everyone in the bleachers that I was going to get a scholarship to Carleton?" My mother blinked. "Of course. And 3 weeks later I didn't get it," Dana said. "And I never told you. I just let you keep telling people." My father frowned. "That's not the same." "It's the same feeling," Dana said. She looked at the floor. "When she left for basic training, everyone in Cobden was talking about it. People at church, at the hardware store. Your daughter's joining the forces. She looked at me briefly, and I was still at home working the checkout at the IGA. She paused. It wasn't the worst thing, saying you left. It was the easiest. My mother sat down heavily on a bench against the wall. She said, 9 years. I didn't respond to that. There wasn't a sentence that made 9 years make sense. My father looked at me for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough in the way voices get when someone is holding something back. I should have called the base, he said. When we got your letters, I should have picked up the phone. Yes, I said. You should have. He nodded once. I thought of the letter that had come back, returned to sender. I thought of the invitation to my wedding that had returned unopened. I said, I wrote to you 4 times. I sent cards every Christmas. I sent a photograph when Sophie was born. My mother's breath caught. Sophie? Our daughter. She's 8. My mother covered her face with both hands. My father was very still. He looked at the floor, and then at the ceiling, and then at nothing in particular. He said, We have a granddaughter. Yes. He said nothing for a while. Then he said, I told your mother once, this was years ago, I told her the cards weren't adding up. That if you'd really left the base in week 8, you wouldn't be mailing us things from Petawawa at Christmas 3 years later. I stared at him. He cleared his throat. I knew it didn't make sense, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to walk it back. Your mother and I had told people, and Dana she was still at home, and she'd been through a hard time. I didn't want to. He stopped. You didn't want to be wrong, I said. He looked at me. No, he said. I didn't. We were quiet for a while. Down the hallway, 2 officers passed without looking at us, the way people do when they recognize a private conversation. Dana was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She looked like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally put it down and isn't sure whether to feel relieved or empty. I'm sorry, she said. It came out flat, not because she didn't mean it, but because it was too small for what it was covering. I looked at her for a moment. I believe you, I said. My mother wiped her eyes and looked up at me. Is it too late? She asked. To meet her. Sophie. I thought about my daughter at home with James. Sophie asking questions about fog and the color of the sky. Sophie arranging toys on the bench at military ceremonies. Sophie, who had been told she had grandparents somewhere and had accepted that answer with the generous, uncomplicated patience of a child. It's not too late, I said. My mother let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. 2 weeks later, my parents drove to Petawawa. James grilled chicken in the backyard. It was a warm evening for October in the Ottawa Valley. Sophie was in the driveway on her bike when their car pulled in. She looked at me. Are those the ones? She asked. Those are the ones, I said. She tilted her head, assessing, in the way she assessed most things. Okay, she said, and biked a slow circle. My parents got out of the car slowly. My mother stopped walking when she saw Sophie. Her hand went to her chest. Sophie braked and walked her bike over. She looked at my mother first, then at my father. She said, Hi. My father bent forward a little. His voice came out thick. He said, Hi there. I'm your grandpa. Sophie considered him. Yeah, she said. I know. She held out her hand the way we'd been working on at school. My father shook it. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile. Something more undone than a smile. Something that moved behind his eyes and made him look suddenly years younger and older at the same time. Sophie turned to my mother. Do you want to see my room? She asked. My mother laughed, startled and genuine. She said, I would love that. James appeared with drinks. He introduced himself to my parents like the steady, practical person he is. They sat at the patio table and talked carefully at first the drive up, the weather, Sophie's school. My father asked James about the base. James asked my father about the bus route, normal sentences, the kind you build a foundation out of. Before they left that evening, my father went to the car and came back with a small cardboard box. He set it on the kitchen table without saying anything. I opened it. Inside were 9 Christmas cards, every one I had mailed, unopened. I couldn't throw them away, he said. I looked at the stack. The handwriting on the earliest ones was younger than mine now. I had been in my 20s when I wrote some of these. Why didn't you open them? I asked. He looked at the box. Because if I opened them, he said quietly, they were real. And if they were real, then I had been wrong for a long time. There it was. Not cruelty, not indifference. Just the particular way pride calcifies when a person can't find a way through it. I looked at the cards for a long time. Then I looked at my father. "Do you want to read them now?" I asked. He looked like I had asked something that surprised him. Then, slowly, he said, "Yes, I think I do." We sat at the kitchen table and he opened them one by one while my mother and Sophie were in the other room, and James cleaned up in the kitchen. He read each one quietly. Some of them took a long time. Some of them he read twice. He didn't say much while he was reading, but at the end he looked up, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "I'm sorry, kiddo." The way he used to when I was small and had fallen off my bike or lost something that mattered. I nodded. "I know. That's where we started." 6 months later, my unit recommended me for promotion to major. The ceremony was held at Petawawa on a bright November morning, 2 days after Remembrance Day. James stood beside me, the way he had stood beside me at every important moment for years. Sophie sat in the front row in her good jacket, legs swinging. But there were new faces in the seats this time. My parents sat 3 rows back. My mother had her small camera. My father sat very straight in his chair with his hands on his knees, watching the front of the room with an attention that told me this was not casual to him. When the promotion was announced and the new rank was placed on my collar, I heard Sophie clap loudly, the way she clapped at everything she genuinely meant. I heard my mother's quick exhale, and I heard, very quietly, my father clear his throat. Afterwards, outside the building, he shook my hand. His grip was firm, the same as it had always been. He looked at the rank insignia, and then at me. "I'm proud of you," he said. Same words he'd written in those early letters from training. Hearing them in person, after everything, was a different thing entirely. My mother hugged me longer than she used to, which I wasn't expecting. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," she said. "What?" She looked at my father, then back at me, with the logic of a child who had accepted all of this and moved on. "Can Grandpa come to my science fair?" My father looked down at her. "When is it?" "Next month," Sophie said. "It's about tides." He said, "I'll be there." And just like that, simply and without drama, the distance began to close. Dana came to visit once, a few months after the ceremony. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring. James took Sophie to the park and left us at the kitchen table with tea. We didn't rush into anything. I asked how she was doing. She said she'd found work at a distribution warehouse in Pembroke, managing inventory. She said it quietly, aware of the irony. I didn't point it out. There wasn't any use in that. She asked about Sophie. I showed her a recent photo Sophie in rubber boots standing in a puddle, looking very satisfied with herself. Dana smiled at it, a real smile. She said, "I'm sorry she didn't know her aunt earlier." I looked at the photo for a second. "She knows you now," I said. "That counts. We didn't make promises we weren't sure we could keep. We didn't manufacture warmth that wasn't ready yet." But we sat at the table until the afternoon light changed, and we talked, and that was something. I think about those 9 years sometimes. People ask if I'm angry about the time that was taken. The honest answer is no, and it's not because the loss didn't matter. It's because I've learned that anger wants to be carried, and I had too much work to do to carry it. What I know instead is this. My parents didn't abandon me because they stopped loving me. My sister didn't lie to them because she was cruel. The whole thing came apart, the way a lot of families come apart, not through malice, but through pride that couldn't find its way out, and silence that grew too loud to hear through. What brought it back wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a perfect apology. It was a uniform that told the truth before anyone had to speak it. It was a little girl holding out her hand in a driveway. It was a box of 9 unopened Christmas cards on a kitchen table, read one by one by a man who had finally run out of reasons not to. If there's anything I want to leave you with tonight, it's this. The next time something feels wrong in your family, ask the question. One more question than you think you need to ask. Call the number. Send the letter. Don't let pride make the decision for you, because a lie can close a door for years. But the truth, when someone is finally willing to carry it into the room, can still open it again. If any part of this stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to stay for the next story, I'll be here. Thank you for listening.